Hello and welcome to this video where I continue the theme of this week's newsletter in my Substack, which is basically squeezing water from stone. In the newsletter, I spoke about Dinglieren's capacity and ability to squeeze water from stone, whereas in this video, we will take a leaf out of the notebook of the best player in the world to do so, none other than former world champion Magnus Carlsen. The position we see here in front of us is from the game Carlsen-Yakovenko from 2009. I have to say that at the time this game was played, Yakovenko was world number 5. So what amazes me in this game and generally by Carlsen's ability to do this on a regular basis is how he manages to outplay these absolute top players from seemingly dead drawn positions. Now this is a mystery, and in this video you will witness it firsthand. How is it actually possible? Yeah. So as we go and I go explaining the moves that happen in this game, I will try to explain what I think happens and how these things happen and why is Carlsen so successful. You know, as Botvinnik used to say about Fischer's victories, you can explain every single one of Fischer's victories. You can explain the moves, but in entirety, it's impossible to explain. So as a whole, it's impossible to explain how this happens regularly. Move by move, game by game, yes, you can explain each one individually. So I guess I can't do better than Botvinnik here. I can explain the moves, I can explain what happened, but the why it happens constantly and happens for many years now, it's just, I guess Carlsen's magic. Okay, let's get to the game. You can see that the game, the position reached here is from the Berlin. Shout out to last week's video where I was talking about the excitement of the Berlin Endgame and how actually games can be won in the Berlin. And here we are on the other side, on the white side of the Berlin, and we have to say that actually white got absolutely nothing. Yakovenko was a very good practitioner of the Berlin, and even in this game against Carlsen, he played his opening well and achieved absolute equality. So in this position, Carlsen's last move was king f2, centralizing the king, and Yakovenko decides to eliminate the last remnant of any theoretical advantage that white may have, which is the king side majority of 4 pawns against black's 3. They are not going anywhere anyway, but Yakovenko just decides to simplify further and make the position symmetrical. So he took rook takes e5, rook takes e5, rook takes e5, rook takes a4, and now we have a symmetrical position. You can even argue, okay, the bishop should be better than a knight in symmetrical positions, but basically nothing is happening, and you could expect any other two players or any other one player with the white pieces to basically agree to a draw here, because you can't realistically expect to win this position with white against a top 5 player, right? Well, yes and no. Carlsen decides to play on. So rook a4, and now Yakovenko plays rook b5, attacking the pawn on b2, but also defending that pawn on b7 and defending against the against the threat of rook a7. So Carlsen goes b4. So yeah, we could say fine, defending the pawn, but introducing one small tiny problem for black, which is the, let's say, a bit strange position of the rook on b5, which is very limited in its movement. It defends the pawn on b7 and guards against rook a7 attack, but doesn't feel very comfortable on b5. But still, what about it? People have saved and made draws with much bigger problems than that rook on b5. But Yakovenko doesn't sit still. he goes c5. So he even gets rid of the doubled pawns. Yeah, so he goes c5 and gets rid, because he will take on b4 on the next move, and he will have a very nice pawn structure without weaknesses. Carlsen goes rook a7, tying the black rook to the defense of the b7 pawn. C takes b4, and now c takes b4. This introduces some small imbalance in the position, in a sense that if under the right circumstances, that these two pawns maybe can create a passed pawn with b5, a6 on the queen side. It's a far off, but still a small imbalance in the position. So what does black do? Well, the problem for the player wanting to make the draw in these positions is that if he looks at the position and really sees no danger whatsoever, yeah, but he still needs to make some moves. And in chess, this is a kind of a characteristic that is not so often talked about, that every single move in chess has some sort of a disadvantage. Because whichever piece you move, there would be some squares left unattended, no longer controlled. And that is the disadvantage of that move. So the opponent can try to take advantage of those squares. So with every move having a disadvantage, this means that, in this case, Carlsen can hope to, well, take some advantage of those squares that are left unattended. But for the time being, objectively, and really the margin of error is so big for black in this position, we can confidently say, well, nothing is happening. What can white possibly expect to do here? But game goes on, and as long as the game goes on, moves have to be made, and these moves, as I said, leave some squares unattended. Yakovenko goes king d7, bringing the king closer to the queen side. Maybe wants to go king c6 or king c8 to take over the defense of the b7 pawn and then free the rook. Carlsen goes knight e2. Okay, this introduces the idea of knight d4. But even if white plays knight d4, it's really harmless. Yes, it attacks the rook, but the rook will move back to b6, for example, and a rook endgame is really a dead draw, nothing left to play there. But it still does improve the position of the knight somewhat. As I said, game goes on. There is one other important aspect that needs to be discussed in these squeezing water from stone positions, and that is that if you want to win a game from such a position, the psychological aspect is very important. What psychological aspect? Well, the psychological aspect of actually creating the impression that you are doing something constructive, that you are making progress. And this is vital, because sitting behind the board and facing an determined opponent who always finds something constructive to do, even though you look at the position and say, but this is nothing. So what if he puts the knight there? So what if he improves the position? It's still a dead draw, true, but facing this type of an opponent who constantly improves and tries to do something constructive is psychologically very difficult. And as history has shown, practically nobody is immune to making mistakes when facing such an opponent. And this is what we will see in this game. It's common. You will see a lot of games with this scenario. Dead draw positions, nothing happens, but then somebody wins. And this is the scenario they all follow. One side starts giving the impression of doing something constructive, improving the position, and the other side starts to feel under pressure. They start to feel inferior, and as a result of this, they start making inferior moves. They start defending when there is no need to defend, and then change happens. Then real problems start to appear. We will see it here really well. So as I said, knight d4 creates this impression of improving the position. The knight was fine on f4, but it's better on d4, centralized, and Carlsen is going forward, improving the position, doing constructive things. Yakovenko goes rook b6, getting away from the attack from d4. Carlsen just improves the position further, centralizing the king e3. Yakovenko goes bishop c4, the threat is rook e6 check to win the knight on e2, knight d4, part of the plan, centralizing the knight. And you can see that the knight is actually not bad at all because it controls all these light squares and limits the mobility of the rook. Another funny thing is that in this position, the rook is on b6 because it's defending that pawn on b7. But actually, the pawn cannot be taken. So black could have played a move like rook d6, for example, just getting the rook away from the awkward position placement on b6. And the point is that taking that pawn of rook takes b7 allows rook a6. Now black takes over the a file and not only attacks the a3 pawn, but also threatens the move king c8 and trapping the rook on b7. So let's say knight c2 defends the pawn on a3 but loses the rook to king c8 and the rook is trapped. And if white doesn't defend the pawn, black will take rook a3 check, further simplification in material, and really that should be it, more or less. So funny thing that the rook is defending the pawn which doesn't even need to be defended. And yet, starting around here, I would say, Yakovenko starts to kind of commit small inaccuracies. So you could, I would say that the cumulative effect of these improvements that white was making with his position, centralizing the king, getting the knight to d4, putting the rook on a7, perhaps starts to be felt by the black player, and he starts to make some imprecisions. And of course, you need to be Carlsen to take advantage of these imprecisions, because I'm pretty sure that I even won't talk about myself, any other player in the world, they are rarely capable of taking advantage of these imprecisions that's in a way that Carlsen manages. So king d6 by Yakovenko, possibly introducing c5 ideas, and now rook a5. So stops c5, but also, very important, introduces one other constructive idea which is actually quite real for white in this position. And that idea is actually the move g4. And if you see the rook on a5 and the pawn on g4 would be attacking the pawn on h5 twice. And after h takes g4, f takes g4, followed by h5, all of a sudden white creates an outside passed pawn. Now this is already very real, especially if you take into consideration that absolutely nothing was happening up to this point. So imagine black's psychological state, waiting for the draw to be made and having this dead drawn position and basically not seeing any danger in the position, all of a sudden being faced by a real danger of an outside passed pawn. These types of psychological changes that happen both in the player's mind and on the board are very difficult to navigate. And this is the moment where games are actually lost for the defending side. I say defending, well, the side who lost the game, basically. But here it's clear that white is still trying to do something, and black is basically, well, I have no problems. What should I do anyway? I can just sit and wait. But by sitting and waiting, as opposed to something constructive that white is trying to do, usually it's the side with constructive things to do that eventually manages to do something worthwhile in the position, and things start to happen. So in this position, Yakovenko made a decision to exchange rooks. Rook a6. The exchange of rooks is forced because the rook from a5 can't move because the pawn on a3 is hanging. But now we're already getting to the phase of the game where things are becoming more concrete. And not only more concrete, but there is already a real danger that black is facing. There are concrete problems that black needs to solve, as opposed to the vague ones that he was facing so far. It was possible to keep the rooks on the board, but that rook was awkward for quite some time for black, so maybe he just wanted to get rid of it. However, after rook takes a6, b takes a6, he can't take with the bishop. Well, because b5 really traps it. So b takes a6, g4 is the move that already poses problems. And now we see that, well, after playing without problem for so long, black already has to solve concrete problems. The point is that gh weakens that pawn on h5, and that pawn on h5 is subject to an attack. Imagine something like knight f5, knight g7, or knight g3 attacking that pawn, and black may easily end up a pawn down. So Yakovenko takes on g4, f takes g4, and now we come to the point where after playing for so long with a really big margin of error, where many moves were possible, many moves were not worsening the position at all, we come to a moment where one move needs to be made to stay in the game. And this is impossible to just do it after having played with that big margin of error up to this point, simply because the player is not attuned to finding that one only move that helps him stay in the game. Even if he did, it doesn't mean that the move was simple. So I will just show you the main line of the, let's say, saving variation to show you that still there would be a lot of concrete problems to solve. And again, I can't stress this enough. The difference between the calm and carefree play leading to this moment compared to the necessity to calculate long and difficult variations to save the game, to bridge that psychological gap, is impossible. In practice, nobody really manages to do that. So in this game, in this moment, Yakovenko made the decisive mistake with king e5, whereas the saving move is c5. But just look at this. B takes c5, king c5, h5, creating a passed pawn. Takes on h5, takes on h5, f6. Black is going to play bishop g8 to stop the pawn from advancing. And in fact, black had to calculate that losing that bishop still leads to a draw. So h6, bishop g8, and now white could try to maneuver with moves like knight b3 and so on, but the most straightforward line is knight e6 check, king d6, knight f8, king e7, h7, winning the piece, but after bishop takes h7, knight takes h7, king f7, black is just in time to save the pawn endgame. The knight is trapped, can't get away, but white is going after the a pawn. However, black is in time. King d4, king g7, knight f6, king f6, king c5, king e5, and black will lose the pawn, but will get to the queen side and will make a draw. Is this easy? Not at all. Especially bearing in mind that this was move 37 with likely time trouble. So what was at the beginning and what looked like at the beginning easy and comfortable draw made in any way, really? It turned out that it's a draw, still a draw, but made with only moves that require deep and precise calculation. So, as I mentioned, this is impossible for players in practice to navigate. In the game, Yakovenko went king e5, but after this, black is lost. h5, knight c6 check first, king f6, king f4, playing on domination. See, the king is really limited in its movements. King e6 and h5, gh. And now the point is that this h pawn is very difficult to control because it's a pawn on the h file, and there are also weaknesses on the queen side. And Carlsen confidently converts bishop d3, controlling the h7 pawn, h7 square, king e3, getting the bishop out of the way, and also intending for the king to go to the king side, to the queen side if necessary. So bishop f1, staying on the f1 a6 diagonal in order to defend this pawn on a6. But now h6, king f6, and knight e5. Now this construction, pawn on h6, knight on e5 against king f6 and pawn on f7, is quite a even without a pawn on f7, is quite standard for this for these endgames, yeah, when how a knight and a pawn on the h file can actually make a barrier for the black king, as it cannot approach. The pawn is controlling the g7 square, the knight is controlling the g6 square, and the king cannot approach the pawn. So in a way, it's like a zugzwang for black, and white has the free king to roam and go to the queen side. So bishop b5, king d4, the king is simply approaching. Bishop a4, and now Carlsen just decides, with the king already nearby the queen side, decides to cash in h7, king g7, knight f7. Obviously the knight cannot be taken because white queens, king takes h7, now check on g5, king g6, knight e6, and both pawns will be lost as the king approaches, and black resign. So what do you say now? Yeah, you witness, you analyze this game, and then you go like, what happened here? How is it possible for a top 5 player to lose from that dead drawn position against anybody? Sometimes I think that Yakovenko would not have lost had he played against an engine, But against Carlsen, he just lost like this, and like you're just speechless after seeing this. So, as I said at the beginning, I explained the moves, I explained the psychology behind the moves, I explained what happened, but why this happens so often and only with this one player, Carlsen, and it doesn't really happen that often or at all with the other top players, is basically beyond me. Who knows? Gift, genius, talents, whatever you may call it, but you can see it. So there you go, squeezing water for stone. If you could learn something from this, well, it would be amazing. But it's one thing to learn it or to be able to explain it, and a completely other thing to actually show it and demonstrate it as an ability when you play the games yourself. Well, with this being said, I still wish you good luck with it. And I will just wrap up this video. Again, inviting you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, to my weekly Substack newsletter, where I talk about different things, chess. Follow me on Twitter, leave your comments, and, well, stay in touch. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you pretty soon again. Take care.